Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching. Diana looked out the window where other children were playing and envied them. Hide and seek, Cossack bandits, soccer, and dozens of other fun activities were all near and far at the same time. She never got to meet anyone in the yard, but that wasn't the only thing stopping her. She just doesn't have time for games or even for acquaintances. Diana had to grow up early. The family can't do without her. First, her mother was in an accident, was in the hospital for a long time, with difficulty moved to a wheelchair, and almost immediately unable to withstand the grief. Grandma Betty went ill. She, of course, moved, but no further than the apartment. And now, at the age of 11, Diana became the legs and arms of the family. The girl hoped that soon everything would change. Daddy called her and promised he'd come back and help her. Even if he took on some of Diana's household chores, she would be able to go outside, not only to school, to the store or to the post office. Diana sighed and began to prepare vegetables for borscht, following her grandmother's recipe. First peel potatoes, grate beets and carrots, fry them in a frying pan with tomatoes and onions. Then boil the broth. Only be sure to pour out the first broth. Carefully put the fried vegetables in the pot so that without splashing, otherwise the kitchen will have to clean. And then she added an author's touch to her grandmother's recipe. When the borscht was almost ready, she added mushrooms and sausages and put a lid on it to let it stand. Grandma Betty told her, "Sprinkle vinegar on it. With borscht like this, any guy will marry you. You cook it today, and I'll show you how to make it tomorrow. I'll just rest a bit." Tomorrow never came. Grandma had many recipes, but now they could only afford the most inexpensive products. Pasta, rice and beans, buckwheat with minced meat or hot sandwiches, and both Grandma and Mom needed to eat well to keep from getting sick. Diana sighed again. She wanted a piece of real sausage or salted trout so badly. A month ago, there had been a party at school and the benefactors from the administration had come. She couldn't keep her eyes off the tray of snacks. Some big guy in a jacket even reprimanded her. "You shouldn't eat too many sandwiches," he said. "You'll get a tummy ache. Silly, silly uncle. How can food give you a tummy ache? It's more likely that she'll get cramps from hunger again." From the big stage, the school children were told how much they care about orphans, homelessness, and other problems of people. And then they gave her a ball and a stick. Diana would have gladly replaced the equipment with a couple of bags of potatoes, rice, and buckwheat. "Lunch is ready," said the girl joyfully. Today she was lucky. There was a lot of meat left on the chicken bones, which the saleswoman proudly called a soup set. Diana carefully cut it off to divide it equally. Mom could make it to the kitchen, though it cost her a lot of effort. Grandma, on the other hand, would have to be fed in the bedroom. She only got out of bed to get to the toilet or bathroom. "Oh, Diana," sighed her mother, sitting in a wheelchair. "You should go outside." "I can't," answered the girl. "I have to mop the floor, do the laundry." Diana never showed her mother that it was hard for her. The girl felt guilt early on. She was the reason her mom was in a wheelchair. If she had not distracted her that day, true, her mother convinced her otherwise, but still. Now, Diana tried to somehow make up for her guilt, and for this it was necessary to become everything for her mother and grandmother: cooking, cleaning, going to the store. How hard could it be? "We should go for sour cream," Mom said. "I'm out." "Good," sighed Diana. "I'll just feed Grandma." "Do you have any money left?" Mom asked. "The allowance won't be transferred until tomorrow." "Maybe I have some change." There was only one store left in their part of town, and they didn't want to go there. The girl still remembered how they used to live close to the center of the metropolis, in such a place where on a tiny piece of land tried to settle as many people as possible. They lived on the 25th floor, and it wasn't at the top. Diana had been used to heights since childhood and had no idea how to get down to the ground. But she had to. A long time ago, when there was nothing to portend trouble, Diana had admired the views of the city from her window, and now they lived on the first. So there was at least a slim chance that her mother could go outside. In theory, it was easy. The first floor is optimal for a wheelchair user. It would seem that open the door, carefully lower the wheels, and enjoy the open space. The picture was spoiled by the stairs between the entrance and the landing. Only 7 steps, Diana sometimes overcame them in one jump. But for Mom, it was a real Everest. The administration promised to solve the issue, to put a ramp or an elevator someday. And then where to go? In the center near the house there was a subway and stores. But here in the suburbs, even the curbs are not lowered everywhere. A couple of times a month they did go for a walk, if someone helped the mother herself to move the wheels. But that wasn't all Diana cared about. Looking at her mom, she realized she was giving up. She was finding it harder and harder to move forward, harder to heal and smile. She was getting desperate, which meant that the headmaster's warnings might well become real. "Grandma, are you going to eat?" the girl asked. Feeding Grandma BT is a ritual. First, you have to help her sit down. Then you have to move the table to the bed, to hear from Baba Bati, a whole treatise of words of advice, compliments, and life stories. Then she would take a spoon or fork in her hands, peck at the dish her granddaughter had prepared, and sink into her memories. "Casey, when will you get married?" Grandma Betty might ask in the middle of the meal. Diana sighed. That her grandmother confused her with her mother was half the problem. Such questions were clearly connected to something more serious. Even with her childish mind, she realized that Betty was going deeper and deeper and deeper into her own world, beginning to confuse not only people, but times. She felt sorry for her grandmother. Diana somehow could not remember her young. It felt like she had come into this world as an old woman. "Baba Bati, is the borscht tasty?" The girl asked to change the subject. "Yes," nodded the old woman. "Only you forgot the potatoes." "How?" Diana was surprised. "Here it is, floating. Is that a potato?" Grandma Betty lamented. Then followed a monologue about how in her youth she worked in the collective farm and spent time in the fields. Diana had heard this story hundreds of times, and from time to time the narrative grew with new details. Over the years, the heroism of rural workers increased, and the potatoes in her grandmother's stories became the size of watermelons. Diana took the dishes from her grandmother, carried them to the kitchen, and began to get ready for the store. "Where is that bag?" "It seems to cost only a few rubles, but if you pay every time, you'll eventually run up 100. Run to the store already." "I'll wash the dishes, don't worry," Mom said. But the girl shook her head. Mom kept trying to do some housework, but Diana knew that every movement brings her pain, especially in the stroller. After the move, there was no money left for special furniture. The regular kitchen set didn't fit Mom in any way. If she could reach the sink, it was with great difficulty. "Save your strength, Mom," Diana said. "I'll wash the dishes and go to the store." The girl, as much as she could, delay the grocery shopping. And it was not just a lack of money. On her grandmother's pension and her mother's allowance, they could survive. The money was distributed by Mom first of all for the most necessary things. At least they weren't in danger of starving. It was the saleswoman who seemed to have taken up residence in the pavilion. Her razor-sharp words really hurt. You could walk to the supermarket, but first of all, it's a half-hour walk. Secondly, then I'd have to carry the heavy bags home. And thirdly, the prices are too high. The prices are too high. They could afford a store with a sharp-tongued saleswoman. A supermarket, no. "Do you want me to go to the store with you?" Mom suggested it. She knew exactly what was embarrassing her daughter. "No, no," the girl replied. "What a wind. You'll get cold feet again." "You just don't listen to her," Mom said. "Take the groceries. Give her the money, and that's it. Do you want me to file a complaint against her? There must be someone to take care of her. Mom, relax. It's okay. The screen on Diana's cell phone lit up. She looked at it and hurried to turn it over. He didn't notice. Mom didn't seem to see anything suspicious in her sudden movement. That's good, otherwise she would be angry. The girl had her own secrets, which she didn't want to tell her mother or grandmother about yet. Many years ago, talented managers came up with a formula for success that allowed tiny stores to compete with huge supermarkets. To do this, there should have been no more than 2 people, and the working day to grow to obscene values. This, however, should not have any effect on the salaries of employees. Only the most desperate people could endure such conditions. One of them is firmly attached to the store with the poetic name Divney. "Look who's here," shouted the saleswoman, our heroine, a Spartan girl. "Well, do you want to choose the potatoes on offer?" There was nothing marvelous in the store. Diane thought they should put another mean sign on the front. It was the clock who was always humiliating her. One day, the 2 of them had come here alone with her mom, and the wheelchair user's affliction had become a source of inspiration for the mean woman. She did not miss the slightest opportunity to say another barb. Thank God, there was no one in the pavilion at that time. There was no escape from the sharp tongue of a woman of indeterminate age. She seemed to take pleasure in the fact that she could treat customers as she pleased. There was simply no second store in their neighborhood. A mystery. Diana put sour cream, tasteless cookies, and bread in the basket. She thought about it and added the cheapest glazed cheese. "Oh, what's the holiday?" The saleswoman splashed her hands in a martial arts way. "Birthday? Will you spread cheese on cookies?" The girl was silent. Such jokes could still be tolerated, although she gave it with difficulty. But sometimes the saleswoman crossed the boundary of all decency and said really hurtful things, bringing Diana to tears. Why she wanted to do that is unclear. "Couldn't Mom run away?" the woman continued. The lack of response from Diana was getting on her nerves. The faker. "I've seen her move her leg. She's playing the part for the benefit, isn't she?" "How much do I owe you?" Diana asked, putting her purchases on the counter. "I'm not telling you," said the clerk. "Not until you answer my questions." The door slammed. Another customer entered the pavilion, and since Juliana didn't know him, she preferred to keep quiet. She practiced her barbs and witticisms only with regular customers. The newcomer seemed to have been here a couple of times, bought bread and cigarettes. But he didn't look familiar enough to be her victim, and he looked too serious for that. "All right," said the clerk. 290 rubles, and no change. But there was nothing in her purse but change anyway, so she counted out the sum without difficulty. Quickly putting the purchases in a bag, the girl hurried out the door. Look, that's it, she wouldn't go here again for anything. And now home. After all, in addition to her chores, she still had homework to do, and school wasn't going so well. The store was right next door, just a 5-minute walk, just in time to call her dad. He sent her a smiley face on Messenger, so that Mom did not find out about their communication. She signed it as her classmate, Leslie, and in the correspondence, only funny pictures and funny videos. It's like 2 girls exchanging humor. The precaution was unnecessary, because her mom didn't touch her smartphone or control it in any way anyway. "Hi," Diana said. "How are you?" "I'm fine," Dad answered. His voice was tired as always. It's been a whole year since they started communicating. Dad was far away now, somewhere in Africa, but he would surely come back. Diana believed that for some reason, every conversation ended with his promises that he was going home. But for some reason, he never gave any exact dates. "I have good news," Dad said. "I think 2 more weeks and that's it, and home." "To us?" Diana asked hopefully. Dad didn't say anything. Then he told her about his work. He described with enthusiasm how many different buildings they were building in a foreign, distant land. He told her how interesting his work was and how strange the rules were in the African country. That he sends money, but his mother refuses to receive it, and she wouldn't answer her phone. Diana believed it. What else could she do? "Don't tell Mom I called," Dad told her goodbye, "or she'll get angry again." "Okay," Diana replied. "I'll be back and then everything will be fine." "I will. Just hang in there." No one knew they were calling each other. Her mom had strictly forbidden her to talk to her father since she was a little girl. Diana cried at first, but then she got used to it. Both her grandmother and mother said only bad things about him. Up to a time, the girl believed it all. But the situation changed after the very accident, when her blossoming and successful mother was in a wheelchair. "Mom, I'm back," Diana announced. "Good for you. Are you okay? Or is something wrong?" Casey always noticed her daughter's mood swings. Now she came in here, not herself. She must have been listening to that sales girl again. Casey wondered why a woman in a tiny store would talk to customers like that. But here, on the outskirts of the city, where they were forced to move from the center of their own rules. "Well, Mom," Diane replied, "all in all, it's fine." "Let's talk about it," Casey suggested. "The hardest thing about being a disabled person is the isolation. Not being able to go to work, not being able to pick out your own clothes at the store, not even being able to go to church. And you can't mop the floor or get anything off the top shelf of the closet. You need a helper all the time. Your daughter, the youngest and only one, became your helper. And then Mom got sick, as if she didn't have enough to deal with." Casey felt remorse all the time. She was ashamed of her own helplessness, of the pain that accompanied every movement. It had been 3 years since her accident, and there was little hope of recovery. "Yes, Mom," Diana said. "There's something I want to talk to you about. I don't know how you'll feel about it." Suddenly they heard some noise coming from Grandma's room. Betty watched television almost all day long, but now was the rare moment when the box was silent. That's why the rumble seemed especially loud. Diana froze in a daze, clinging to the wall. Casey moved slowly toward her mother's room. She traversed the hallway and pushed open the door. "Diana," the woman shouted. "Hurry up and get in here. Grandma's not well." "Diana, where's my phone?" It's a strange thing about the human memory. Only the fondest memories remain in it, especially school. Over time, the twos, the remarks, the antics of classmates fade, the inedible dishes of the school cafeteria, and any warm moments, any celebrations, become brighter. Daisy was stuck in this school, which she'd been in charge of for a good 2 decades, and she still didn't want to retire. "Hello," once again the principal was being nice. "Come in, have a seat, tea or coffee?" "We don't have time for that," replied the interlocutor gloomily. Strong coffee, but no sugar. The inspectors had been to her school countless times. Before Daisy's eyes, approaches to education were changing, from the absolute freedom of the Naftis to the total control of the 20s. She'd seen the piercing epidemic, survived the invasion of rappers in oversized pants, witnessed the birth and untimely death of emo. And only one thing remained constant: the constant complaints of the administration. Daisy was nervous. There were too many issues with this Diana and her family. In her quiet school, where only children of ordinary parents attended, hardship was neither liked nor approved of. A third letter had come down from the administration, demanding that they look into the situation and take action. Daisy was hinted that her unwillingness to read between the lines could be seen as incompetent. "The child is in a dangerous situation," argued John, a department head in the administration. "We could lose the girl at any moment. Don't you agree with me?" The principal's intransigence forced the official to come to her school in person. Daisy wistfully recalled the 2 blissful years of the coronavirus pandemic. Remote working off days, but paid, mosques for visitors, and most importantly, no inspections. Alas, the sweet time is over. And now, If an official suddenly wants to visit her, he may not even warn. I can't imagine how a teacher with such a solid experience and work experience doesn't see the problem. The official lamented. It is obvious that the girl needs our help. We work with her every day, the principal assured him. Here, take a look. Inspections, testing, preventive talks. All according to the manual. More coffee? This coffee only makes my heart ache, John replied with ostentatious sadness. Do it again with a little more sugar. And let's not change the subject, please. Daisy took a deep breath. She looked at the official and tried to calculate his age. He'd graduated from Teachers University at 22 at the earliest. 3 years at least he'd spent as a school teacher. Then he'd probably worked his way up to deputy. That's another 3 years. Then he spent a long time trying to get through the selection process for a higher position. Total 33 years old, not younger than she's old enough to be her son. She certainly looks older than she is. You have outdated information, the official said. I can state with all certainty that the grandmother is not able to look after the child. Why? The principal was surprised. Age is not a judgment, young man. What's that got to do with it? The official waved his hand resentfully. It's something else. She went to the hospital yesterday with a fractured femoral neck. We have, the latest information. What a nightmare, Daisy whispered. Such a fracture is every elderly person's worst dream. You see, John nodded his head. We have to take immediate action. You can't just write it off as some mythical grandmother's care. As you can see, I'm well informed. Daisy sighed again. She would have to call a council and invite both the girl and her mother. She was notoriously difficult to get around. She'd have to bring the matter before the council, hear their opinions. For some reason, Daisy didn't want to make a mess of it. People live their lives. Why bother them? You'd think there weren't any other problem families on her property. One question, she said. Why do you care so much about this family? Is she special? 2 months and the end of the year. Before you know it, and you have not removed a single child at risk from the family, answered the official from the administration. A bare zero in the column. You myopically fail to notice that it's the Stones who are fit to add a 1 to the report. Or how do we explain that gap at the end of the year? So we just don't have those kids, Daisy replied calmly. It's an old neighborhood. Families are few. We've never suffered from a glut of dysfunctional ones. I don't want to hear excuses, the man shouted. Every neighborhood is the same. You're the only one with a 0. Enough, we have to act. John spoke about 1,000 words and drank 4 cups of coffee. Daisy started out as a math teacher and automatically counted everything that happened around her. That made her feel better. She felt sorry for Diana in both a motherly and human way. The entire faculty was aware of her troubled history. Now the absence of her grandmother was added to the ordeal. The principal sighed and pressed the selector button. Elizabeth, she said, prepare the order. We'll be holding a rash Julian council on the Stones. What is today, Tuesday? Let's make it Friday, 6:00 p.m. Diane looked around fearfully. Hospitals always scared her. They were like whole towns with their own enclosed areas, while you figure out where to go while you look at the map. It was scary, but there was nowhere to go. Grandma was waiting. Diana could hardly find the right building. It was the biggest and the tallest. Not a hospital, but a whole metropolis. Now the last obstacle left on the way was a nurse who had to follow instruction. No, children are not allowed either, said the woman in the white coat. I understand that you want to see your grandmother. I can hand you the phone and you can make a video call. But she doesn't know how to use it, Diana almost screamed. From resentment and helplessness, she wanted to weep. The girl had traveled a long way, all alone, to hear such a thing. Diana could not understand why she, her own granddaughter, would not be allowed to visit her grandmother. That's when her mother was in the hospital. The doctors even insisted that she came more often. But now, okay, the nurse gave up. I'll show you in, but just for a minute. Put on shoe covers and a mask too. You have your own, don't you? Diana started to cry out of resentment. How did she know she had to bring a mask and shoe covers to the hospital? All she had taken were large sandwiches, just the way her grandmother liked them, and also a bag carefully folded by her mother. Slippers, a mug, a towel, and other small things. In the world of adults, too many conventions. The girl could not get used to them. Okay, sighed the nurse. Here, put it on, but do not cry. Let's go. I hope no one will see us, and I won't get punished for this. The woman led Diana through the long corridors of the first floor. It was the second time the girl had been in such a large hospital, but she was still amazed at the scale. 3 years ago, when the accident happened to her mom, Diana was taken to the ward by her grandmother. Now she has to wander the corridors on her own, without an adult. You understand it's not my whim, the nurse excused herself. It's the pandemic, the coronavirus. Do you know what it is? Yes, answered Diana. Of course you do. The girl loved learning through Zoom. She could devote many times more time to her mother and grandmother. And then, when studying went back to the usual format, the opportunities disappeared, and now she had to get up at the crack of dawn to make breakfast, throw out the trash, and help her mom get dressed. Here we go, the nurse answered as she led her to the service elevator. Come on in, baby. We're getting slaughtered for this coronavirus. You're lucky you're right next to the elevators. The rounds are over. No one will see us. Just make it quick, okay? Grandma was lying on the bed with her leg hanging from the ceiling. It was weird, but it was warm, and there were only 3 people in the room. Grandma Beatty turned to her granddaughter as if she could sense her, and a smile immediately appeared on the old woman's gray face. What she had been through. "Oh, Casey," she said. "Can you believe it? I twisted my ankle." "Grandma, it's me, Diana," said the girl. "I brought sandwiches." The nurse let them talk for a few minutes and went to check on the other patients. She would adjust someone's pillow, give someone a bottle of water. Diana thought how hard this job was. She didn't want to work in a hospital. She had a completely different dream. "Grandma, does it hurt a lot?" the girl asked. "Well," the old woman waved her hand. "It'll heal. When I saw you, I thought of Casey again." As Diana walked toward the subway, she felt very tired. She had homework to do and then a massage for her mom. If she didn't exercise her legs, they wouldn't work. Suddenly her cell phone rang, and a familiar number popped up. "Diane, don't worry. That's what the class said. Daisy's having some big board meeting Friday night. You should bring your mom. But you know that," sighed the girl. She's already tired of telling everyone that the wheelchair is not an all-terrain vehicle, and therefore to climb to the second floor of her mother will not be able to. "Diana, don't worry." The teacher continued. "Daisy knows. We'll be meeting on the first floor. I told our men to help. Mom's gonna be there for sure. I'll call her too, okay? It's hard to live without a dream." And Diana had one too. When the girl got off the subway, she suddenly froze in front of a billboard. There were 3 ballerinas on it, frozen in the most graceful movement imaginable. For a few minutes, Diana stood admiring them, unable to move from her seat. She wanted to be a ballerina too. She had all the data for it. Long legs, slender body, excellent stretching. But when would she go to class? The school advertised various clubs and sections. They also called her to ballet, but warned her that the selection was very strict. Of course Diana would have passed it. Where would her family find the money to buy her special shoes and a skirt? Who would drive her to the other side of town? Apparently the dream would remain a dream. All Diana could do was put her feet up and stretch in her room, imagining she was studying ballet and admiring ballerinas on her phone. The drive to and from the hospital took over 3 hours. It was 9 o'clock at night, and there was still so much to do. Casey tried not to show her desperation to anyone. At some point, she'd pulled the black card, and her life had gone downhill ever since. Trouble started with Steve swearing his undying love for so many years and then running away. Then the accident. She still couldn't believe that such a ridiculous accident could wipe out all her plans and hopes for the future. Now her mom was in trouble, and she couldn't do anything to help. Casey felt like a doll with something broken. She couldn't feel her legs at all, despite such a long treatment. But problems, as it turns out, weren't enough. So today the call from school came. Instead of helping her, of caring for her, they want to take her child away from her. Is that fair? The front door slammed. You can hear it on the first floor. The key in the lock turned. Her daughter is back. Finally. How is she? Casey asked when Diana appeared in the doorway. Lying down, the girl shrugged. Did you talk to her? Did they let you in? Yes, Diana answered. Only it's a secret. Don't tell anyone. The woman laughed. Diana was the only joy in Casey's life. Looking at her, she realized that everything was not in vain. But now she was the only support, too. Who would try to keep them apart is beyond me. I got a call from the school, Casey said. They said they can't live without me. They're expecting me over Friday night. I mean, you know, it's like the weekend starting, and I got to get home. And they're trying to get me out. I know, Diane said. Are you going to eat your pancakes? I'll make them real quick. Casey watched her daughter kneading the batter and couldn't get enough of it. Yeah, the kid had to grow up fast. On the other hand, she's so independent. She can cook, clean, do her own laundry. If they had a little more money, it would be possible to order ready-made food right at home. It was good that the girl understood all the trials that fell to her lot. Did you do your homework? Casey asked. Do you want me to help you? No, Mommy, you don't have to, Diana answered. I can do it all by myself. This independence on the one hand pleased, but on the other, frightened. It wouldn't be long before she'd be out of the house. And she has to think about how to prepare for that time. Not long ago, she was a strong and independent woman. She worked as a deputy director of construction, personally traveled to the sites and controlled everyone and everything. And now she can't even control her own limbs. Mom, they're not going to take me away, are they? Diana asked suddenly. What do you mean? Casey was surprised. Who will? Those people at school. The class teacher told me you can't do parenting. Like, don't worry, sunshine, replied Casey. You gotta fight till the end. You can't give up. Put the pancakes over here and I'll wrap carrots in them. The insidiousness of her injury was that any careless movement could cause unbearable pain. Now she had raised her arms too high, and a pulse pierced her entire body. Even her legs hurt, though she couldn't feel them at all. Casey instantly turned pale and sweat appeared on her forehead. Mom, come on, Diana said. I'll wrap it myself. Okay, Casey agreed. Hand me my pills. If it weren't for the painkillers, she'd have lost her mind a long time ago. Casey swallowed one pancake with difficulty, then turned around and went to her room. When she'd bought this apartment, she'd thought she'd been lucky. 3 rooms, first floor, not the worst neighborhood. But now, after a year of living on the outskirts, the dead end was more and more clearly visible. The money was spent on treatment, not even enough for a decent stroller. Mommy, I need to massage my legs, Diana said. Don't, sighed Casey. Why don't you get some rest? Mom, you're not giving up, are you? Seriously asked her daughter. Of course I'm not. Okay, go ahead. She'd never asked Diana to help. But the smart girl had watched carefully the expensive resuscitator who had come a few times a year ago and had memorized his movements. He kneaded her legs as she lay on the bed, rubbing her muscles. It wasn't easy for the girl, of course, but Diana tried. Now she was visited only by a free doctor, and from him she heard only regrets. But she was grateful for that too. 11 p.m. Was another shift coming to an end? Julianne walked to the entrance to flip the sign to closed and lock the lock. Suddenly, someone yanked the door open sharply. So sharply that she couldn't hold it. Night visitors, come to think of it. No, darling, you'll have to find somewhere else to entertain yourself. Closed, she said in the nastiest voice she could muster. No, my princess, replied the tipsy man. One more minute. We have to work to the last customer. Get out. The princess is not in the mood today, Julianne replied, shoved the uninvited guest and quickly closed the door. She felt better immediately. Doing bad things to people was wonderful. It was only at times like this that she forgot for a second how worthless and miserable her life was. But there was no one to blame. She had backed herself into a corner. Julianne loved trading, but there was nothing else she could do. Since she was 16, she had stood behind various counters, selling beer and casks, gloves and eyeglasses, moving further and further and further up the sales career ladder. But in this stall, proudly called a pavilion, she was stuck. Why didn't you serve her? A fat man behind her counter asked her reproachfully. She hadn't even noticed he'd come in, quiet as always just before closing time. How does he manage to do this every time? I'm closed, Julianne answered, but in a less confident tone. 11 o'clock at night is closed. I'll give you that closed. Go get him. Come on, Jacob demanded. The salesgirl had no choice but to rush to the entrance, open it, and go outside. Outside, illuminated by the streetlights, Julianne easily recognized the wobbly figure of the guest. It was not that he had gone far away. Come back, she shouted. The princess changed her mind. She called the man for a long time. He moved slowly, wobbling, but did not even turn around. He only waved his hand, saying, "Leave me alone." Maybe he was afraid she'd beckon him to close the door. Yeah, she's in for a world of hurt. So this is how we pay our debts, Jacob yelled at her when she came back alone. I forgive you for everything, by the way. And you? I'm sorry, Jacob, I'm sorry, Julianne said, and smiled. She wished he hadn't hit her this time. The old bruises on her face had just healed, and she didn't want to get new ones in their place. Look at me, said the owner, and went deep into the receipts. He came every 3 days for the proceeds, trusting no one else to handle the money. I'll forgive it this time, all right. Julianne tried to remember where this life had started. Paul, as they say, her common-law husband, had gotten her a job in this pavilion. He himself worked as a loader, and she got a place behind the counter. Ira was naive and stupid at the time. She didn't do accounting at all. And Jacob was different, courteous, caring, polite. She liked everything, the 2-by-2 schedule, the salary, and the atmosphere. But Paul disappeared one day after a year of working together, and that's when she learned the dreaded word inventory. Jacob discovered a huge shortage of 500,000 rubles. Julianne couldn't even believe that such a large sum could be stolen from such a store, but the owner was convinced that Julianne and her boyfriend had been stealing his money, and they pinned it on her. Jacob spoke arrogantly. Thank Paul, thank your failed husband. The owner fired the second shift, leaving Julianne alone in the company of a disenfranchised loader. They didn't stay long and changed shifts almost every month. The saleswoman now kept a close eye on the money from the cash register. She wrote it all down and checked the receipts, but her debt was melting too slowly. In 2 years, Jacob had only written off half the money. She had to work 12 hours at the counter to pay off her debts. Only one day off Sunday kept her warm. Then she could come to work not at 9 in the woof, Sunday. Kept her warm. Morning, but at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Have you forgotten where I got you? Jacob asked. Forget my kindness? I could have turned you into the police, you and Paul. Jacob, come on, Julianne said. It's been so long. You're going to work me and work me and work me. Did you see Paul sneaking money out of the cash register? I did, and I didn't say a word. So you were in on it with him. I haven't forgotten anything, Julianne sighed. It was a shame not only to get such a large debt, but also to lose her admirer overnight. He quietly packed up their room and retreated. At least, he called her. She'd changed since then, too. All I had to do was piss off the customers. The only people who come here are those who have nowhere else to go. One time I yelled at an old lady who couldn't find a penny, and it was over, so that Casey could attend the meeting. The principal decided to hold it in the auditorium. This was the only place where a person in a wheelchair could get in without any problems. Looking at the girl's mother, Daisy felt both pity and fear. If it were up to her, she wouldn't have looked at the half-paralyzed woman at all. She had to get this done quickly and move on. "Dear colleagues," Daisy said, "let's not waste any time. Let's get on with the Stone situation. This is the third time we've been instructed to check the family's condition and make a conclusion as to whether Casey Stone is capable of being a parent." For the third time, Casey felt disgusted. School was only a 5-minute walk from home, but they seemed to her like a march to Calvary. First, 2 locals took her down the stairs in a wheelchair for $1,000. They almost dropped her. Then she was forced up hills and slowed down on descents to get to school. Diana kept trying to help, but she couldn't. A little girl can't handle a big stroller. "We're getting alarming signals," the principal continued. "In fact, Diana Stone has been left to fend for herself. She has to support not only herself, but also, pardon me for being blunt, her infirm mother. While we all deplore Casey Stone's situation, we need to. Don't be rude. Put the children first. Is the psychologist here?" The room they were invited into with their daughter was indeed crowded. Some pedagogue could well cope behind the rows of soft seats. Diana, tired after the school day and the transitions with her mother, almost dozed off in her seat. At first, Casey wanted to get up and resent her. Then she remembered that she was confined to a wheelchair and decided to keep quiet. "The child's emotional state is alarming," said the girl, obviously a psychologist. "I conducted a series of tests for anxiety, depression, goal setting." "What are the conclusions?" suddenly asked a full man in a jacket who was sitting on one of the armchairs. "The psychological state is extremely unstable," the psychologist replied. "The child is obviously under a lot of stress, which is understandable due to the situation in the family. There is a complete mismatch of age and behavioral role." The psychologist said a lot of other clever things, the general sense of which was that Casey had put too much responsibility on her only daughter, and herself, therefore enjoying the situation. It was outrageous. But Casey knew how to keep her emotions in check, especially in a situation like this, where she had to be patient. Then the class teacher, who had not been particularly fond of Diana from the beginning, spoke. Then the representative of the parents' committee made a denunciatory speech, which surprised Casey. She kept silent, though it was getting harder and harder to hold back. Finally, the word came to Diana. "What's going on?" the girl asked. "Why are you guys talking about us like this? Mom and Grandma and I are doing just fine. You better help." "Diana," interrupted the principal, "we don't think your mom's capable of parenting." "But Daisy," the girl objected. "She's getting better. She's doing much better. Mommy works out every day. It's hard without Grandma, but we're not going to give up. Why are we listening to her?" Slammed his fist on the table full of a man who until now had remained silent. "As we decide, so it will be." There was a murmur in the hall, the teachers argued. Obviously, they had to solve such cases not often. It's one thing when parents abuse alcohol and children are not engaged. It's quite another if the mother is just in trouble. And she's reacting so calmly to what's going on. "Can I say something?" Casey finally asked. "Do I get a defense or not?" "Yes, please," nodded Daisy. "We are listening attentively." "I'm going through a difficult time," said Casey. "You can't prepare for something like this. There are so many problems. But I can tell you one thing. I'm not giving up hope. I'm not giving up hope. I'm not giving up. I have a plan to fix everything." "Stone," The man in the jacket interrupted her. You tell us one thing. Are you on those meds right now? Don't make me say that word out loud in front of the kids. No, said Casey. It was getting harder and harder to stay calm. The very drug that you don't want to say it has been out of stock in pharmacies for 6 months. I've decided to give it up myself. The man was embarrassed. He was quickly going through the papers on the table in front of him. He rubbed his head with both hands and looked from Daisy to Casey. He opened his mouth to say something, but then he faltered. I'm asking one thing, Casey said, to build on the success. Give us some time. I'll get a nurse. I'll get Diane an assistant. I'll knock on every door to get us help. It's just, the man in the jacket started to say, but the principal interrupted him. 2 weeks, Daisy said. 2 weeks to correct the deficiencies. Otherwise, the removal of the child is inevitable. All those in favor? The teachers raised their hands almost unanimously. Unanimously, said the principal. The board decided to recognize the family as a dangerous situation, to give a period of 2 weeks to eliminate the shortcomings that have been pointed out. So, we're not holding the stones any longer. Help Casey up, out into the hall. On to other matters, colleagues. Mom, don't cry, Diana asked as they stood in the hallway. Don't cry. Come on. You and I have a lot to do. We need to stretch your legs. Wait, Casey replied, wiping away her tears. Wait a couple more minutes. I haven't said everything I need to say yet. Just then, the door to the school hall opened and the principal came out. She walked quickly, not looking back, but it was impossible to keep up with the wheelchair-bound girl in the narrow hallway. Casey moved nimbly toward her, working her arms vigorously. She must have never been so fast in a wheelchair before. Daisy saw her and tried to change her trajectory, but it was too late. A word, asked Casey. The principal tried to walk, but the woman nimbly grabbed her arm. How can you say no to a wheelchair user? Just a few words. Okay, Daisy gave in after a brief maneuvering. What kind of show is this? The woman was outraged. I'm going to complain. I'll go all the way to the top. You will all be fired, do you hear me? Surprisingly, the director reacted calmly to the threats. She adjusted her jacket, looked at Casey expressively. Listen to me, please, Daisy said. A child should have a childhood. It's not just about her becoming your nurse. It's about you, too. You know what this is about, don't you? It was slow going in the other direction. Casey's arms were tired from the experience, and her palms were blistered. She'd noticed that experienced strollers wore gloves, but for some reason she hadn't. She just hadn't quite gotten used to the idea that infirmity was permanent, and you have to live with it. The girl just felt devastated. Teachers so mundanely decided her fate, as if it was a car or another inanimate object. Look, we're out of oil, Casey said. It might be a good idea to go to the store. It's on the way. No need, Mom, said Diane. There's that evil woman. No, let's go, Mom demanded. Let her say all the mean things to my face. If she has the guts. To get to the store, you had to cross the road and the curb. In front of the pavilion, there was a special lowering of the sidewalk. But exactly on this place, someone had put a huge car that could not go around or around. Diana came closer and looked for a plate with a phone number. Under the windshield was an ironic inscription. Is my car in the way? Sorry? Mom, let's go around, Diane said. No, said Casey. We could turn around and get in. Let's try it. The woman must have just lacked the experience of a stroller. For several minutes she tried to climb the curb, but in vain. Eventually she moved further down the path and found a low curb that wasn't blocked by a car. These movements had exhausted her, and she literally couldn't feel her arms. She needed a break. There was a convenient ramp leading to the store, which Casey overcame with the help of her daughter. Together they were able to get through the transparent door. Inside there were several customers. Old men and old women, leisurely comparing prices and looking for the cheapest. No way. Julianne splashed her hands picturesquely when she saw Diana and her mom in a wheelchair. They're my regulars. It's been a long time since your feet have been here, Queen Mother. Casey thought her daughter's stories about this woman were exaggerations. Now she could see for herself that they were real. The saleswoman kept going, as if in a hurry to tell all the crude jokes she'd made about wheelchair users. Casey was literally dumbfounded by this stream of barbs. I thought that after our first meeting your feet would not be here anymore, continued the saleswoman, smiling wryly. Oh, I'm sorry. There are legs, but they're kind of gone. The crude jokes, which she could have just ignored, suddenly echoed in Casey's soul with pain. She wanted to answer so that the saleswoman would shut up, to say everything she thought about the insolent brat who had no one else to take it out on. But I had no strength at all. Even a small line of customers couldn't stop the flow of snide remarks. It was as if Juliana had a second wind. She was both punching out the goods and humiliating her customer at the same time. Dear, Casey said instead in the calmest voice she could muster, you can see that this is a person with a disability. I need a package of butter. Show some respect. Who's gonna respect me? Julianne replied sharply. Butter to get her through. I've been standing here for 12 hours at a time. I don't even have time to go to the bathroom. Because of the saleswoman's behavior, the line in front of the counter began to accumulate. The small pavilion could hardly fit 10 people. In the evening, there were a lot of visitors, and there might even be a queue. For some reason, Casey wanted to demonstrate her legal awareness. After all, people with disabilities should be served without waiting in line. Why not demand that the slut obey the law? Dear me, she said, I have the right not to stand in line. You must serve me on a priority basis. Come over here and sell me some butter. Only not to stand in line. Julianne looked surprised. I wondered why you were always sitting. If you don't want to stand in line, don't stand in line. Don't stand in line. It seems to me that if you wanted to, you couldn't. The few customers looked at Casey. She couldn't take it anymore and cried. The saleswoman had hit a sore spot. The woman would never really be able to get up from her chair, no matter how much she wanted to convince herself otherwise. She could hire the best doctors, buy the most expensive medications. It wouldn't help. Her daughter approached the counter and looked at the saleswoman defiantly. You know what? You're actually the one who's never going to be able to get up. Me? Julianne acted surprised. Look, I'm standing. And she took a few steps forward and backward to dispel any doubts. You think you're standing. You're not really standing, you're lying down. At the bottom, Julianne asked. The girl who never responded to her barbs as if she were cutting her without a knife. You've given up, Diana said. That's why you're acting like this. And you can't give up. Never. Me? Julianne flared up. Gave up. What do you know about it, you little thing? Yes, the girl nodded. I can see you don't like working here. I can see you're like a fly behind a pane of glass, fighting and fighting. My mom's strong. You're not even close. Choke on your butter. We're leaving. The girl turned around, grabbed Casey's stroller by the handles and started pushing it toward the exit. There were claps at her back as the sparse customers applauded. They must not have liked Julianne and her jokes either. The saleswoman herself froze with her hand extended toward the refrigerator. The girl's words, harmless at first glance, had hurt her deeply and deeply. Why are we clapping? She said after a pause. I have no flies here, not a single one. Only bees fly to honey, you know. The 7 steps leading to the first floor were her Everest. How do you climb them if your legs won't obey you? Because they were late for a meeting in the store. There were no one willing to help her climb them for a reasonable fee. After the humiliation of the last hour, Casey wanted to show her strength of character. "Can you lift the chair?" she asked her daughter. "Bring it into the apartment." "Yes, but—" Casey didn't listen to the girl, grabbed the handrail at the wall and started climbing up. It was clumsy, but what can you do? You had to get used to it sometime. There was a flaw in her plan. Once on the platform, she was completely exhausted, and now she had to get back into the chair. Diana couldn't lift her crippled body. She'd already struggled to get the stroller in. "We're out of oil," Casey said, lying on the platform with her head up. She smiled. "Mommy, why did we move here?" the girl asked. "It's not a good place for a handicapped person." "That's right," Casey agreed. "We moved here because Mommy ran out of money. Give me a hand. I'm going to store my wheelchair." With great difficulty and with her daughter's help, she managed to climb back into the wheelchair. She was sweating from the exertion. Casey had expected her body to respond with pain to such an ordeal, but today her body was responding calmly to all the challenges and hardships. The reason for their move was trivial. When she sold her previous apartment and settled her debts with the bank, there wasn't much money left, and the first floor seemed like a great option to her. "Mom, what did you say about a nurse?" the girl suddenly asked, opening the door. "Where are we going to get the money for her?" "That was just a figure of speech," Casey said. "I bargained for 2 weeks. I'll figure something out. Your mom used to have a way with people, you know." The girl sighed. She seemed to be taking the situation more seriously than her mother. It was only now beginning to dawn on Diana that they might be separated. Who would take care of her mother? Who will stretch her legs, cook breakfast and dinner? The girl became very sorry for herself and her mother. "But you cannot give up. You need to think." She just taught the sales clerk, who is 3 times her age, not to despair. "Let's ask Dad for help," Diana suggested. "I wish he was with us, or get a room somewhere nearby. You don't have a father." Casey was angry, and her cheerful mood faded. "He left you. He left you. Don't you dare say his name in my house." "But Mom, they won't give up," the girl continued. "They won't give up." Casey thought her daughter needed some kind word of encouragement. To encourage, to help, to participate. But the words just wouldn't make sense in her head. How could she explain that her worthless father wouldn't help her, not even by crawling to him on her knees? That's exactly what Casey could theoretically do for her daughter. "Tomorrow's the weekend," Mom said. "We'll sit down together and figure out a way out of this. And we have to go to Grandma's house. Can you make it?" "Of course," said the girl. "Go take a break. I'll make sandwiches. I have some inspiration." Of course, the woman was lying. Her arms were very tired after the physical exertion. But she wanted to show herself that she could still do something, that she was a mother, not a burden. With the board on her lap, Casey could cook something. Like slicing bread and spreading butter on it, there was only a little bit of it left. It took a lot of effort to stretch it over 4 slices of bread. There was no meat either, so Casey finally chopped up 2 sausages she could reach in the refrigerator. At times the pain receded, and Casey could even hope for the best. And on this night, when her maimed body wasn't giving her any trouble, it was her soul that decided to suffer. Who was she kidding? She couldn't hire a nurse for herself or a babysitter for her daughter. It's not even that Diana was brilliant at all the housework. The problem is something else. Poverty is her biggest ailment. As soon as you fall out of the world of successful people, poverty is there. If you're young and healthy, it can be cured, but not for the infirm and elderly. Casey thought about the fact that winter was coming and she didn't have the money to buy her daughter a new jacket and boots. Maybe she really should give up. They say everyone should help the infirm. On paper, maybe that's true, but in life it's the other way around. Agree with that soulless principle and ask her for help. Maybe there's some boarding school where children can stay with infirm parents. "Diana," called Casey, chasing away her bleak thoughts. "Come and have some tea." Diana hated the subway. Every time she went down to the subway, the girl felt an incomprehensible fear. Before the accident, her mother used to take her by car. She's an excellent driver, Together they would go to the swimming pool or to the supermarket, where you don't have to talk to the salespeople at all. Sometimes Grandma joined them. The three of them had a lot of fun. Once again, the girl remembered that fateful day. How her mom sat her on the booster, buckled her in, pressed the gas. According to the rules, children are forbidden to travel in the front seat. But she and Mom were so inseparable that they ignored that requirement. Mom had a big French car. Diane's fondest memories were of that car. How they went to New York for the weekend and wandered the beautiful streets, admired the waterfront. How they went to the ice arena and watched hockey, and then wandered around the floors of the parking lot for a long time because they forgot where they left their car. How together they went to the water park where they rode down the high slides together on a cotton candy. Now, all this is in the past. To Diana's daily routine was added a trip to the hospital, but just to say a trip. First, boil her grandmother's favorite borscht and pour it into a jar. Then to take the third trolley bus to the subway. Then another 20 minutes of shaking deep above the ground. And then, finally, the hospital. But no one is allowed inside because of the quarantine. In the train car, Diana dozed off and saw that very day again, the crossroads that took Masha at her mother's health. The girl knew that the car had an automatic box. That means you only have to push the pedal and you don't have to pull the lever. Why did she tell her mom it was okay to drive? The girl got out of the subway and walked towards the hospital. She remembered well where the building she needed was. She tried to give herself a cheerful and carefree look. At the bottom, Diana met the same kind-hearted nurse who took her to her grandmother's room, despite the prohibitions. "How do you do?" smiled the girl. "I'm here to see Betty Stone. Do you remember me? I wish I could go up and talk to her. Mommy and I miss her terribly." "You can't," said the nurse, checking the list and sighing. "No way. Can I pass the soup?" Diana asked and picked up her bag. She was ready to say no, but she was still upset. "No, darling, it won't work," said the woman in the white coat. "Here, you know, there is such a thing." "What's wrong?" "Your grandmother got worse," said the woman. Tonight, she was transferred to the intensive care unit. But don't worry and don't worry. It has nothing to do with the trauma. "What does it have to do with?" Diana asked. She felt the floor move out from under her feet, and then the nurse took her by the shoulder. "Coronavirus be damned," she sighed. "She tested positive. Her SATs are low. You know what it does to old people?" "You're not mistaken?" Diana asked hopefully. "Maybe you're confusing my grandmother with someone else." "If only," replied the nurse. "Do you know how good my memory is? And her name is such a rare name, Betty. That was my grandmother's name too. But you hang in there. God willing, she'll pull through." "What am I gonna do?" The woman in the white coat took a piece of paper and scribbled some numbers on it. "Here. It's the duty post in the red zone. You can call periodically, inquire. If they don't answer the first time, call again. There's a lot of patients, you know. You can't keep track of them all." Diana walked back to the subway. A useless can of borscht, which she had so lovingly prepared, was hanging in her bag. She understood about the intensive care unit. It was a place where people were put when they got sick. But what is saturation? And why was Grandma's saturation low? She had to ask the nurse all these questions. And most importantly, would her ordeal ever end? Daddy, only Daddy, could help her. She pulled out her phone and hit the call button on Messenger. Silence. He hadn't answered her yesterday either, but she had called him late at night. The girl still couldn't remember the difference between her city and Africa. Daddy never told her what time it was in the city where he was. Diana pressed the call button again and again. Silence. Not one funny picture. Not one smiley face. Dad was gone. That hurt worse than a knife. After all these years, he'd appeared in her life and disappeared again. But her heart refused to believe in her father's perfidy. No, something had happened to him. Just like Mom. just like Grandma. It's just a pity that there's no one there to help him. He's all alone there. Their usual conversation always took the same turn. She would ask Daddy to come back to her, and he would explain for a long time why it was impossible. He had a very beautiful voice, like a newscaster or a politician. The girl tried to change her father's mind, refusing to believe that adults can be so stupid and vindictive. "It's hard for me to come back, Diana," sighed the father in such cases. "I've hurt your mother terribly. I hurt her to death. She'll forgive me," Diana said to herself over and over again. After all, her mother, so strong and successful, so lively and determined, always forgave her daughter. Was her daddy really that much different? If he had come back a little earlier, nothing would have happened to him there, in the faraway land of Africa. Immersed in gloomy thoughts, Diana went down to the subway. It was indeed a mechanism that always worked. The trains underground, like giant toys, kept moving forward. And it seemed to her that these huge, soulless machines didn't care what happened to the occupants. Like the escalators, they would keep moving, no matter what happened outside. Daisy was rewriting her own letter of resignation for the third time. The calculation didn't allow her to resign. Otherwise, she'd get a regular pension, not a civil servant's. And the difference was enormous. The principal didn't want to be part of the play John was putting on. Removing a child from a family is always stressful. But the Stones case was special. In her long career as a teacher, she'd seen a lot of troubled families. She was impressed by the mother who left her young children home alone and went on multi-day trips to visit, or a father who for some reason decided that his son should eat sunshine and vegetable broth. In all seriousness. But these were all extremes, inevitable in huge cities. The situation of the Stones seemed to demand a very different approach. Not the formal approach that the administration suggested, but a creative one. Raised on ideals, the principal struggled to remember what could have been offered at that time. Perhaps an apartment would have been found for them, and they would have found her crippled mother some kind of a job. We lost. The official from the administration was terribly angry with her after Friday's council. He said a lot of ugly words, scolded her for indecision and incompetence. What does he know? How long had he worked at the school? So Daisy was determined to leave. Good thing her seniority and age allowed her to ask for a resignation. If they said 2 weeks, that's fine, the official said, waving his hand. So the same Friday, come as a group. Take the district inspector, make the most vicious, the most defamatory report, and take the child away. Is that clear? The principal still couldn't write 6 lines without mistakes. Resignations were supposed to be handwritten. As an experienced teacher, it was completely incomprehensible to her. Why such a mundane document would not be entrusted to a computer? After making another mistake, Daisy grabbed the paper and tore it up in a rage. Once she was alone with her thoughts, 2 antagonists appeared alternately in her mind. John, the administration official for whom numbers mattered most, and Casey Stone, who demanded human feelings and participation from her. Each of them is right in his own way. The official is worried about something irreparable happening. When a man is in trouble, he's capable of anything. And in this case, it's better to be reassured than to rely on risk. A woman in a wheelchair wants to be helped. She has every right to be helped. But by a strange coincidence, Daisy can't give her a hand. The petition kept failing. This time, she cut it off on the first line, writing forgiveness. Very symbolic. She really needed forgiveness. What should we do? The girl must have relatives. She has to, at least a father. If John was so keen for her to get a policeman involved, why not ask him for help? The police have a very wide range of possibilities. Now the girl called the hospital every day, morning and evening. The woman on duty patiently told her about the lack of change in her grandmother's condition. This expectation put pressure on Diana, but it was even more difficult for her mother. She called the hospital too, but it looked different. She dialed the numbers and stared at the screen for a long time, hesitating to press the green button. Diana stood at the entrance to the Divine, waiting for one of the adults. In front of strangers, this rascal will certainly not dare to exercise in wit. Although the girl vowed not to go to the store with an angry saleswoman, there was nowhere to go. They had too many tasks for the weekend. And in the evenings, Diana practiced pause, standing in front of the mirror. So going to a normal store in the next neighborhood would mean giving up class. And today it was vital for her to do stretching. Then pour day, it was vital for her to do stretching. Then port-de-bras, plies, and battlements. It would help take her mind off her thoughts because of Daddy's silence. She didn't know what to think anymore. After a minute of waiting, some uncle in a long coat walked up. He smiled at her and carefully opened the door. "What, it won't budge?" he asked. "Come in, little girl." When Julianne saw the girl at the door, she opened her mouth for another witticism, but stopped herself. It was the first time she'd ever seen a man in a coat, and her cardinal rule was not to attack strangers. She didn't know who he was. Maybe Jacob had sent him to check up on her. Judging by the decent coat, he wasn't from around here. I'll have to bite my tongue. "Come in, I'll serve you," she said as friendly as she could. "And you, girl, don't steal anything." "No, no." The man waved his hands. He took the saleswoman's barb as a joke. "First the girl, or you really need to keep an eye on them." "What are you going to buy, little girl?" "Oh, I need a lot of things," said the girl. "And beets and carrots." "Let's you first." "No," the man insisted. "I'm in no hurry. Do you want me to help you?" Satisfied, Diana left the store. What a polite uncle. I wish her daddy was as kind and polite. Her phone rang. "Diana," Mom screamed. "Hurry back!" The girl rushed home. It didn't seem like much longer, but Diana felt she was moving too slowly. That morning, Casey decided that she would move forward no matter what. Yes, getting out of a wheelchair wouldn't work. But now, in the 21st century, it was possible not to leave the house at all. When she was in the hospital, she was given brochures and flyers where disabled people like her sat, smiling in front of computers and laptops. She would do the same. She still had a nice laptop with a nice apple on it from her successful days as deputy director. Casey had thought about selling it several times, but hadn't dared. And it wasn't just that they wouldn't give a good price for this thing. This laptop was the only window into the world of her past where she was a successful and truly driven woman. "Discover the world of remote work," the man said from the screen. "You can not only earn, but also realize yourself as a successful, in-demand specialist." "Enough said," Casey said impatiently. "What is there to do?" How could she have never thought to find something like this before? Hours at the laptop allowed her to distract herself from sad thoughts. Her Diana is only 10 years old. 11 in 2 weeks. Need to pull herself together and work from home. There were hundreds of articles about how people in much worse shape than her had made money. It's all about not giving up. You can ask someone for help. You could complain. A good mood enveloped her, and sometimes she forgot even about her ailment. But then despair would come over Casey in a black wave, and that was the worst of it. You can get used to the inconveniences of life. Casey is lucky that she can at least maintain herself, and her daughter doesn't have to do the most humiliating jobs. With the last of their money, they remodeled the toilet and bathroom so that a person with disabilities doesn't feel completely helpless. But the rest of a kitchen set where she could make something more than sandwiches cost an insane amount of money. If she'd known she'd be in this situation, she'd have lived more frugally, more wisely. No waste. Trying to invest in her own future. Searching for a job on the internet. The woman was so engrossed that she didn't notice that lunch had passed. She never called the hospital, but she managed to find something similar to a job, She wrote reviews, filled out cards, and did other things like that. Everything was going just fine. She just disconnected from reality. At times, he was distracted by extraneous sounds, like small footsteps in the hallway or rain outside the window. What was that? She didn't want to leave her occupation, but curiosity took over. She wheeled her wheelchair into the hallway and marveled. Small streams of water ran down the walls. It had already completely covered the floor. Newspaper and slippers were floating. The main leak was in the kitchen area. Casey didn't even dare go there. Don't panic. Just need to go upstairs and see which neighbor forgot to turn off the water. Now she'll get up and go. Wait, she can't go upstairs, can she? Who do I call? The management company, of course. But in a year of living in this house, Casey had never had time to get to know the local utility company. Casey went back to her room. It was still dry. 4 o'clock. Diana should be on her way home by now. We should ask her to come sooner. After her daughter's call, Casey came to her senses and pulled up her laptop. The main thing is to keep the water off it. Found the management company's cell phone busy. Why is she going through all this trouble? The mom's call caught Diana off guard. What the hell happened? Must be something with her grandmother. The girl ran down the street and looked around. Seems like everyone's a little coffee. Craze this year. Vending machines. Cafes like mushrooms after the rain. And there's only one store in the whole neighborhood. And it's on the way home from school. And she has to go in there every day, listening to the nasty thing. When you're in a hurry, time starts to flow slowly on purpose. The universe is in no hurry. And now Diana ran up to the traffic light. But the green light was still on. She wanted to run across the road, but the cars were moving in a continuous stream. The girl pressed the button again and again, but the signals did not want to change. Finally, the light turned green. You can run on the road is free, but only Diana made a few steps. Near her there was a squeal of tires. A cab car stopped right beside her, and the driver ran a red light. The man felt it his duty to lower the side window and shout, "Watch where you're going, asshole." He raised the window and was gone. And Diana thought that it was because of such drivers that her mom was in a wheelchair. You have to be more careful. The girl ran on. Here is the house. It is good that they live on the first floor. The distance to the front door she covered in 2 jumps. "Mommy," screamed the girl, running into the house. A wave of heat and dampness hit her in the face, and her feet began to slap as if running on a puddle. Did Mom spill water? Thought Diana. Unlikely. Everything was in the water. The walls, the ceilings, the floor. Her boots were instantly soaked with liquid. "Diana, we have to collect it," Mom shouted. "Immediately collect." The girl rushed into the bathroom, took a bucket and a rag, but there was so much water that the bucket was instantly full. So she took a scoop and started scooping the water with it. The heavy bucket was so hard to lift to pour it into the toilet. "Mom, what's going on?" the girl asked. "We've been flooded, Diana." Casey managed to find the culprit. She was told over the phone that the faucet in the 4th floor kitchen caused the problem. The upstairs neighbors were at work and didn't notice the leak until it reached the 1st floor. It was everywhere, pouring from outlets, dripping from the walls, dripping from the ceilings. The emergency crew shut off the supply. Now they had no water either. Diane took out at least 10 full buckets before the dustbin was useless. Then she began to collect water with a rag and wring it out. This struggle with the communal element lasted at least 2 hours. Squeezed out like her own rag to collect water. The girl fell to the floor. She was all wet from work and fatigue. "Diana, get up," Mom said. "Get up, you have to change your clothes, you'll get sick." "I can't," replied Diana. "No strength. Come on, daughter." Casey surveyed the damage. The already unpretentious apartment looked like a brothel. Wallpaper was peeling off the walls and ceiling. Doctor frames were swollen. Turning on electrical appliances was out of the question. So, Through the fault of a negligent neighbor, they found themselves in a most depressing situation. Diana finally found the strength to get up. She took off her wet clothes and hung them on the radiator. "We should open the windows," Casey said. "It'll get the air out faster. Just get dressed first." By 9:00 p.m., the management company came to the apartment. The engineer meticulously described all the damage. Affected the kitchen, the corridor, and grandmother's room. It is closest to the epicenter of the attack. Some of the furniture's in the dumpster. Casey and Diane's rooms were spared. The water just dripped through the floor to them without causing any damage. "Don't worry," said the man who identified himself as an engineer. "We will definitely help you restore everything. And we'll help you with the furniture." "Everything?" Diana asked hopefully. "Yes," he nodded. "We'll wallpaper and whitewash the ceilings. It's our plumber, be damned, who hung the faucet badly. Damn him." "Can you start tomorrow?" Casey asked. "The thing is, I'd love to," said the engineer. "But I'm sorry. It takes 2 weeks for it to dry. It can't be sooner than that. It's the law." Casey thought about how laws can only work when they work against her. "I strongly disagree with your act," Casey said. "We were flooded 2 days ago." "Well, you can file an objection." A week after the humiliating council, on a Friday, the delegation showed up unannounced at Casey's house. Diane was at school, and that's a good thing. She would definitely yell at these soulless, heartless women. The committee meticulously inspected the rooms, looked in closets and the refrigerator. 2 women kept marking things in their papers. "I wish they'd help," Casey said. "How am I supposed to change the wallpaper? I have an allowance of $150. I can barely exist on that money." "If you can't do it, if you can't handle it, just say so," her guest told her. The mental strength that had come to Casey not so long ago was again on the verge of exhaustion. The only thing that pleased her was that the pain in her back did not return even when she raised her arms high above her head. It must have been that after the mental torment, physical suffering was simply impossible. The girl's room was fine, the inspector summarized. "But the common areas need urgent repairs." "Didn't you hear that?" Casey asked. "I told you, we're flooded. You go out into the entryway and there's water stains all over the place." "I heard," said the woman, "but you didn't hear me. We need to get this place fixed right away. Soap, 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 soap." "Start over." When Casey was given the report, she began to read it carefully and make handwritten notes, which caused displeasure of the inspectors. She did not leave a single line without caustic remarks and comments. At some point, the women accepted that they would not be able to get out of here quickly and began to wait. One of them said, "The deadline to eliminate the remarks is a week. We need to re-wallpaper, change the floors. Bring your tools, I'll get started." "Very funny," said one of the inspectors. "We understand the situation you're in and humanly sympathize with you. But why should the child suffer?" When Diana got home, she saw her mom in tears. She didn't roll out into the hallway to greet her like she usually did. Sitting in front of her laptop, she was browsing some websites. Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Mom, hi," Diana said, "and I called the hospital. Can you believe it? Grandma's already been disconnected from something." "From what?" Casey asked fearfully. "Is that it?" "I still haven't figured it out," Diana admitted. "I thought she couldn't breathe, but now she can." "Thank God," Mom said. "We should go see her. At least give her a message from us." "I'll go tomorrow," Diana promised. "Mom, have you been crying?" "Yes, sweetie." "Mom, but you told me not to give up. That you have to be strong." "Have you forgotten?" "No, I haven't forgotten," Casey said, wiping away her tears. "But sometimes it's okay to cry a little. The important thing, my dear, is to stop in time." Diana went into the kitchen. The wooden floor had heaved and now resembled an obstacle course for toy cars. The air was still damp with water evaporating from the surfaces. She made her mother some tea and a couple of cheese sandwiches and brought them into the room. Diana didn't want to eat. "Mommy, you're not going to give me to them, are you?" the girl asked. "No, darling. You and I will always be together no matter what happens." The week went by quickly, even too quickly. That Friday, Diana decided not to go to school. If it was her last day at home, she'd rather spend it with her mom. Besides, she had never skipped a class. It was time to start. She could take her time, make a simple breakfast, watch TV together. If the weather was nice, they could try to go outside. Diana went to the kitchen, looked in the refrigerator. Not much. There were 3 eggs in the door and 2 mushrooms in the vegetable compartment. She also found a couple of sausages and a tiny piece of cheese. She beat the eggs, added the sliced sausages and mushrooms, topped it all with the rest of the ketchup, crumbled the cheese and poured it into the pan. It made a great omelet that tasted like pizza. "I take it you didn't go to school?" Mom asked, eating her breakfast. "No," Diana answered. "I don't feel well." "I understand," Mom nodded. "If the school board comes, they might take you away." "Let's not think about bad things," the girl asked. "You'll still be able to visit me if anything. Or I'll run away and come back to you." They were silent for a while. Diana put the kettle on the stove. How good it is to have breakfast like this, without hurry, to talk to a dear person. It used to be like that, but it was her mother, not her, who worked on the stove. Would anyone think of separating them? Suddenly the bell rang. 9:30 in the morning? Are they crazy? "Go and see," Mom asked with a smile. On the doorstep stood a young man with a large box. Like a wizard, he rummaged through it, pulled out a package and handed it to her. "Delivery service," the young man replied. "Here, sign here." But we didn't order anything." The girl was surprised. "We have nothing to pay with." "Strange, the address seems to be the same," shrugged the courier. "We don't need to pay. It's a prepayment." "I'll ask," Diana replied, and took the box. With it, she went to the kitchen. Her mother was sitting there, smiling strangely. Diana had not seen her so satisfied and even happy for a long time. "Open it," she said. Diana took out the box, lifted the lid. Pointy shoes, the very real ones, white in color. The girl's hands trembled with excitement. She put them on her feet. They fit just right. She stood on her tiptoes and began to do the movements she had learned herself in front of the mirror. There's not much room in their narrow kitchen. "Happy birthday," Mom said. "Did you think I'd forgotten?" "Oh, Mom, thank you," Diana replied. "I forgot myself. But..." "Where did the money come from?" "You won't believe it, daughter," said Casey. "I earned it on the internet. You saw me on my laptop for 2 weeks. It was a real miracle." Diana rushed to the door to thank the courier, but he was already gone. In the window of the first floor was visible as he dragged his box and checked with the navigator. What a job, the girl thought. He must be exhausted by evening. "Did you think I didn't know your secrets?" Her mother winked at her. "How can I tell you?" Diana shrugged. "There's no secret. I always wanted to be a ballerina." No sooner had they finished their tea than the bell rang again. It was timid, even hesitant, as if the visitor was hesitant to come in. Casey froze with her mug raised. "Is it really so early?" she asked. "I thought they were coming tonight." "Don't give up, Mom," the girl said. The bell rang again. Diana went to the door and peered through the peephole. She expected to see Daisy, her classmate, and other familiar people. So much for the school not showing up. Instead of a huge delegation, there was a man standing there. Something about his face seemed familiar. She seemed to have seen his picture somewhere before. "Hello," Diana said. "Who do you want?" "Hello," whispered the man and smiled. "Daddy," shouted the girl, opening the door wide. "What the hell is this?" Jacob looked around his store and couldn't believe his eyes. What had his serf done? There was a proud sign on the door, written in marker, "Recount." When had it closed? All the aisles were littered with cardboard boxes, with the same marker indicating the type of goods and their quantity. Some with milk, kefir, and cheese were carefully placed in refrigerators. "What the hell is this?" Jacob asked, grabbing Juliana by the sweater. "I'm asking you, what is this?" "Get your hands off me. I'm quitting," the salesgirl replied. "How dare you?" The owner was outraged. "Here, take a look," Julianne said, and handed him a whole notebook written in her hand. "I've counted it all. There's a shortfall, but it's a tiny 3,000. I put it in the cash register." "What do you think you're doing?" Jacob said. "His whole pavilion is only 50 square meters with the warehouse. That's exactly what he needs to sell alcohol. The basis of his prosperity." Jacob made the most of this modest space. The merchandise is everywhere. In the refrigerators, on the counter, and even in the aisles. But another important part of his success is Julianne, whose ex almost drove him into the world. Of course, in the 500,000 he wrote absolutely all the shortages over the years of the store. But the uncomplaining salesgirl swallowed it. She didn't argue, she worked a double shift. "Julianne, let's talk." Jacob suddenly turned from anger to grace. "You're supposed to give me 2 weeks' notice. I'll find a replacement." "No, you won't," the salesgirl said. "We have an employment contract with you, remember?" Jacob tried to give the appearance of obeying the law. Julianne did indeed work for him officially. But since he couldn't afford a lawyer, he had to handle the paperwork himself. Had he missed the end of her contract? "Julianne, you can't do that," the landlord said. "We can talk. I'll cancel some of your debt." "Debt?" Julianne wrinkled her face. "I've paid it all off. I'm leaving." "What about the police?" Jacob said hopefully. "Court." "Go ahead," answered the former saleswoman. She pulled off her apron, the only uniform her stingy employer had provided her with, and threw it on the floor. Opening the door, she slammed it hard, hoping to break the glass. But it stood. This was not how he'd envisioned this meeting. Steve had thought the door would swing wide open in front of him, and he'd walk in with a winning gait, handing out gifts. Casey, realizing and forgiving, would rush to hug him. But instead of his cheerful daughter, he sees a thin, haggard Diana. Does she even eat anything? Wallpaper hung from the ceilings and walls. In the kitchen of the old shabby apartment sat Casey, sitting in her wheelchair. She covered her face with her hand in embarrassment. Of course, she used to be so strong, so powerful and independent. Life had taken its toll on her. Steve held out to her in embarrassment the bouquet he'd bought at the train station. Bright red roses, just the way she liked them. "Here I am," he exhaled. "I'm back." Casey was silent. He could read a range of feelings in her gaze, but hate wasn't one of them. I wondered if she'd filed for divorce. That last time 4 years ago, when she'd refused to see him. He'd snapped, found a job 3 miles away, and left. He hasn't been back to his home country of Russia in over 3 years, and a year ago, Facebook offered him a new friend, with the same last name and familiar facial features. Diana turned out to be all grown up. They communicated for a year, and then he realized he couldn't be away from his daughter anymore, especially when he received a call from a schoolmate saying that he was wanted by the principal of the school where Diana studies. True, he'd never been told about Casey's accident. "Papa, I'm so glad," Diana said. "How about some tea?" Casey remained silent, and Steve stood holding out the flowers to her. Then the girl took them and put them in a 3-liter jar. They didn't have a vase at home. She suddenly realized that she had not imagined meeting her father at all. There were almost no childhood memories of him, just of going to the movies and once eating ice cream. "I'm sorry, Casey," he said after a long silence. "It's my fault. I gave in." Casey was silent. Steve kept wondering if his wife had filed for divorce. He certainly wouldn't have done it himself. On his passport, they were still husband and wife. An inner strength prevented Casey from not only asking for help, but even accepting it. All she had to do was say 2 words about the state she was in. He would have flown in, rushed over. But she didn't say a word. "If you won't forgive me for your own sake, then forgive me for your daughter's sake," Steve asked. "I can see you're having a hard time here." "I don't know," said Casey. "I don't know if you can stay with us after everything you've done, or rather what you haven't done." "I don't know either." Steve shrugged. That's the way Casey's always been. If a man is strong, he measures others by himself. He sees any weakness as a betrayal. He'd always been weaker than she was. His wife's expressive silence hit him worse than any shout. He wanted to get up, rush outside, and run to the airport. Fly far away from here. But he felt in his gut that both his daughter and his wife needed his help. "Why don't we take a vote?" Diane suggested it. "All those in favor of Daddy staying, I'm in favor." Casey was silent. Diana could see in her mom that she was hesitant. She wants to be a proud, independent woman, but they can't do it without her dad. Turns out he didn't fool her into coming, and just when she needed him most. Who dare keep them apart now? "Me neither," Steve said. "I want to stay with you. If not right here, I'll get an apartment somewhere. I'll come and help out, take Diane to school." "She's doing it on her own," Casey said sharply. "You should have asked her if she had winter clothes and shoes." "That's right," Steve shouted happily. "And you and me, Diana, we're going shopping now, aren't we? And we'll take your mother, won't we?" He looked hesitantly at Casey's legs, covered with the blanket. He would have liked to ask what had happened and what the prospects were, but he was afraid of making his wife angry, afraid she'd change her mind and kick him out the door. "If she wanted to," he hastened to add. "You two go," the woman said. "I'll allow it. I've got things to do here." Daisy was determined that the play called Removal of a Child from a Family would go on without her. She hasn't returned calls from administration officials. She sent her letter of resignation by courier. She has every right not to visit the girl and not to tear her from the arms of her loving mother. Really, there's nothing else the principal can do. "No, she's asked not to let anyone in," the receptionist said. "Daisy is very ill." "Out of my way." The authoritative voice was John's, of course. He swung open the door to the headmaster's office and entered regally. The principal really wasn't well. The official waved her application, holding it up with 2 fingers in a squeamish manner. "Look what Daisy's been up to." "Explain," John demanded. "What is this?" "This," the principal interjected. "My resignation. I'm resigning. It's my legal right." "Oh, your legal right," the official raged. "Right. So, this is how you do my bidding." "Coffee for us," he demanded, but no one came forward to do his bidding. John couldn't understand why this obedient and uncomplaining woman was suddenly rebelling. He must bring the process to an end and take Diana away from her negligent mother. What did it matter why she couldn't fulfill her duties? And so, at the last moment, the principal stabs him in the back. At 6:00 p.m., "I'm closing the office," she says, "and I'm leaving. And the Stones." "I'm not going to the Stones," the principal said. "Period." "That's okay," the official replied. "Nothing. There will be teachers here to do my bidding. And you, Daisy, will be ashamed." That day, Diana finally felt like a little girl. Yes, she had just turned 11, so she might as well be a little weaker than adults. Dad, it turns out, doesn't know the city at all. Together with him, they looked for shopping centers on the internet, went there, walked around. It seemed that Daddy wanted to catch up on all the years he had missed. Diana could not relax and constantly looked at the prices. How expensive everything was. But Daddy put his arm around her shoulders and told her it was nothing. That he could afford a lot of things. But the girl still tried to choose things cheaper. "It's a great jacket," she assured her father. "Very warm." "It's too short for you," Dad replied. "Take it off immediately." Then there was a cafe where Dad ordered her a small cake with a candle. The animator sang congratulations to the whole shopping center, and the visitors clapped her from the tables quite sincerely. They didn't get home until the evening. Diana was happy. She had not been given so many presents for a long time. Is it all true? There was a noise in the entrance. The girl recognized a familiar voice. It seemed to shout psychologist from school. Around her gathered a whole delegation, which was cramped in the corridor of an old panel house. But the mother, sitting on a wheelchair, steadfastly held the defense. "And I'm telling you that she's not here," she said irritably. "She's out walking, and I won't let you into the apartment. Then I'll call the police." The psychologist replied, "And they'll take you to the police station for hiding your daughter from us." "I'm not hiding from anyone," said Diana. "Hello." "There she is," the psychologist said cheerfully. "Let's get a report. Let's take her in." Steve felt afraid. Where were they going to take his daughter? He came back to her after all these years to lose her all at once. He took a step forward and covered Diana with his large figure. The educators looked at him in surprise. "Who are you?" one of them asked. "I am the father," he answered. "How dare you?" Casey shouted. "We are a well-to-do family." "Woman," said the psychologist arrogantly. "If you bring a man home, it doesn't always indicate well-being." "This is my husband," said Casey. "Passport," the psychologist demanded. Steve pulled out a document and held it out to the delegation. Each member of the delegation, in turn, examined his passport. After a long journey, the appearance of the document left much to be desired. But the page with the stamp of marriage registration and the birth of a child had been preserved. "I don't understand anything." The psychologist stretched out. "How did we miss it? But I understand everything," Steve said, and grabbed his passport. He suddenly felt strong. "Get out of the way, can't you see? The child is tired and wants to rest." The man moved the school delegation, as it seemed to him, with a slight movement of his hand. In fact, they parted on their own. Steve let Diana go through, glanced over his shoulder. He was about to close the door, but then he thought it would be polite to be polite. "We're a normal family," he said. "We are. Just leave it alone, that's all. Be happy."